Catch up on all the live shows right here on africatechradio.com.
Hello and welcome to Cruise Control. This is Africa Tech Radio. My name is Vicky, your host as usual. And I've been talking that a lot has been said and is happening when we look at the fourth industrial revolution. And there's been ranges of emotions from fear to acceptance, enthusiasm, and of course the zeal for more when we look at what the industrial revolution is all about, and of course the technology that is penetrating our system right now. You definitely see that people are embracing technology, and of course Africa is trying to catch up with what the other world is all about. And today with me on the show, I have the honor to speak with Professor of 4IR, and of course she's a strategist, economist, and social activist. She's also a commissioner in the SA Presidency National Planning Commission, serving leadership roles that drive significant transformation and of course the impact solution to economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, I have with me Professor Miriam Altman on the show. Hi, Professor Miriam. Hello.
Hello.
We're good. So it's being observed that the world is revolving and changing rapidly. I mean, if we look around us right now, a lot of things we used to do manually has changed, right? I mean, we can now connect. I'm so excited to be connecting with you. It's kind of seamless now, unlike how in the past this would have been a little bit difficult to achieve, but right now it's easy for us to connect anywhere in the world. And of course, we look at how artificial intelligence and robotics, even now the metaverse is becoming part of our social and economic life. So I'm thinking, how do we take advantage of this fourth industrial revolution to be able to drive a long-term inclusive and sustainable economic development on the continent?
Look at countries like Vietnam, many years ago, even as a low-income country, just to take an example, they made huge progress in connecting every household, getting the cost of broadband down, making sure that there was complete coverage. It's really a choice that gets made to make everybody's covered. It's not necessarily connected to level of income or development, and it is absolutely critical, particularly in Africa where we've got a big youth population, to make sure that everybody's connected, because it's going to be critical for the careers and the businesses of the future in ways that we don't even know yet.
I mean, it's going to have a lot to do with how we now relate, even in governance. I remember having a conversation with someone and saying how this has even come to change the way that we see governance in Africa. Looking at the blockchain system, I asked if it was possible where we now have a system that is transparent enough, just like the blockchain, and we can see what is happening just to reduce geopolitical manipulations and all of that stuff. And I would like to know, does this blockchain system, is it applicable in governance in Africa? Because I was able to get a clear answer the last time I asked. So I'll bring the question again. The blockchain system, how can it help African continent when it comes to geopolitical system?
Well, blockchain for sure can be beneficial, but let's not jump the gun. Let's not fetishize some of this jargon. The issue number one is that we need broadband, and we need it to be covering everybody. We need information systems, because you can't do blockchain if you don't have information systems. Because effectively what blockchain does is it enables one to register information, like, for example, land registries, as an something very basic like that. So, you need information systems. You need a certain capability within the state and within the private sector, and, intellectual capability and human capability to drive these systems. You need to have significant capacity to cooperate for blended finance across public and private spheres of finance to come together around the financing of these systems. it's an all-in kind of thing. So we shouldn't fetishize things like blockchain. There's no doubt. I hear about people saying, "Oh, we're setting up a blockchain fund in," and they'll pick some, Togo or something, and that's great. But the problem in ICT, and I've seen this for many years, is that you get somebody who has one singular idea and are excited about one thing, but this thing is about systems. And so what happens is that countries lock into one part of maybe a vendor-led system, and it creates a kind of investment that is not very effective because it becomes like a white elephant. And what governments in particular need to do is they need to become well-versed and at least a minimum amount of capability to understand what is required in their context to give life to this amazing digital world and what it can do for, services, to prepare the population for the future and so forth.
I mean, if we look at the blockchain system, we definitely could look at the data collection and how we can have some system connecting with us. That's why I asked the question. Amongst these things are the fear that we have, because this fourth revolution has been ongoing. I wouldn't say it's new, but the acceptance rate has been quite slow. If you look at some African countries, people are just beginning to tap into this system. So how do we tackle the fear that this is happening to us right now, and how do we benefit from all of this?
Why do you think it's fear? Why do you use that word out of curiosity?
So I would say fear in the sense that most African parents from this side, Nigeria, would definitely be contemplating around workforce, how they are being replaced at work, and how their children are being exposed to so many things that is beyond their control. So that's the fear base. More so, we see the enthusiasm. It's kind of slow to accepting what technology is bringing to them. So we are kind of not as fast-paced as the other world, is the reason why I would say fear. And how can we tackle this and make them understand that, okay, this is for your good, our good, and of course, this is what the future is.
So I think this thing can be kind of, intimidating.
Okay.
So one of the things that has to happen is we do have to get populations into the cloud. And one of the ways of doing that is actually through public services. Mm-hmm. And realize, what the benefits could be. Of course, there are dangers related to children and related to just general personal information. And this is where, governments have to get better at regulation and the management of privacy and the management of cybersecurity. Because what happens also is that in a poor country where people are getting online, there can be a lot of abuse and very poor management, and one can underestimate what these dangers are. But in the meantime, the way of getting people online, very often it can be that like how I first got online was because I just had to. I was required to by my workplace many, many years ago. Mm-hmm. So, if you have, like in South Africa, we have social grants. If you require, which we do actually, that people get online to do it, it forces people online, and then they realize it's not such a big deal, as it was for me when I started. I thought it was a big thing. And then you get online, you go, oh, this is easy. And it's got easier, over time. It's much more user-friendly. But, again, that issue of protection mm-hmm. and having maybe blocks on the usage by children. Yeah. Parents' involvement in it is very critical, and generally public education becomes very important for sure.
I mean, speaking of education, all of this means there will be a reform in our education system, and of course the availability of educational opportunities for Africans. What would it be that the government needs to do when it comes to improving the education system for Africans to be able to be more knowledgeable and of course be able to tap into the wealth of this revolution?
So there's no doubt that we need a curriculum overhaul, but in the meantime, there are, having schools hooked up, having online education, which can even mean doing, like a lot of people think, it doesn't even necessarily mean that the whole curriculum's online, but rather that kids are starting to do teamwork and some basic digital interface kind of interaction, that there's computer studies and at least some interface in the schools, that there's after school programs, that kids are starting to get more access to things like coding, even if just for cognitive development, even if they're not going to go into coding, it's very helpful in the studying math is. But even if you're not going to become a mathematician, studying math at school is very helpful for cognitive development, as is coding. And so things like that you're starting to build into the curriculum, some of these things step by step. And then, of course, teacher training is really critical. And then being flexible with the equipment. What I find is that a lot of schooling systems are very focused on the hard equipment, and actually there's so much you can do without it. If kids have, even without broadband, you can have programs on kids' phones, and they can get involved in teamwork and doing digital problem solving. There's a lot you can do even in a low resourced environment.
Absolutely. I remember at the start of the show, I was talking about how now in Nigeria over here, we now have like so many events. I think I saw about 2 billboards that are promoting like tech events, and it's quite new over here. Usually we have entertainment events, we have people doing art stuff maybe on their own, and now it's a merge of art and technology, and I could see like the acceptance is it's coming up in over here in Nigeria. But now we're all talking about the Africa Tech Festival, and of course I'm made to know that you're going to be one of their keynote speakers. What are the things we are to expect from this Africa Tech Festival happening in Cape Town?
Oh, well, this is something that happens every year, and it's a great event. Fortunately, we're back in person again this year, which is great. And, it's just a great place to convene and connect from across the continent and find out what everyone's doing. So I'm involved in a whole bunch of sessions with people from across the continent on a number of days. And we'll be exploring lots of different, from Niger to South Africa to, all over the continent. It's wonderful. And one finds out innovations, even in some of the low-income economies, there's some fantastic things and innovations happening. As I say, it's not, some people think it's a developed country thing. There's loads you can do with this stuff. And it's perfect in an African environment where we have long distances. Like the Niger example, where they're starting to really pick up their digital agenda, where you've got huge distances between people, and even in South Africa, and it really helps you with service delivery and creating more inclusion in a way that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And it's not high end, it's really stuff that's in hand that we can do, and we must do.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll definitely be doing more of this in Nigeria, and of course joining the rest of the world to be part of this events and changes happening. But most importantly, we cannot talk about all of this without talking about the climate change situation that is affecting us. How do we tackle the effect of this climate change with technology?
Okay, well, the first thing is, before you go off your last point, because you keep talking about Nigeria, of course, Nigeria is also the creator of many of the top tech innovations in Africa, just to say. So give yourself...
Yes, we do. I was reading an article that says we have majority of the startups here in Nigeria, that we're looking at the Africa geography, and we saw that Nigeria has so many startups that have helped prefer solution, and I must give that to us over here. We are always working and looking for ways to invent and to bring up innovative ideas that could help make life easier. So we give it up for Nigerians for their efforts.
Yeah, you've got some great entrepreneurs in Nigeria, like people like Iya Abayeji, Wave, and things like that. You've got some fantastic startups, some fantastic tech funds. There's a lot going in Nigeria. I realize it's a big country and it may not feel like it reaches everybody, but I would say Nigeria really is a leading country in Africa in relation to tech startups. So, yeah, like I said, give yourself a little bit of credit.
Sure.
Coming to climate change, there's a couple of ways of thinking about this. Firstly, the very digital transformation that we're talking about in itself is very climate orientated. So, for example, it requires, like, if you can have more services online, it requires less travel, less fuel being used, things like that. That repair work sometimes can be done remotely, that a lot of these things can be done remotely. And right there, you could be saving on resource, fuel and petrol and all that type of thing, just to say. You could be raising efficiency and service delivery through preemptive type of information systems that give early feedback where pipes are breaking down, or, that type of thing. So, it's fantastic from that. It can be fantastic from that perspective. In terms of climate change per se, there's, some of the innovations that we're going to be talking about at AfricaCom in some of my sessions actually are things like where countries are gathering, they're going to be using drone technology and that type of thing to be looking at the encroaching deserts, water issues, climate change, really monitoring the situation around agriculture with information systems, and the use of drones is something that a number of countries are looking at doing to try to manage the experience of climate change. So that's the flip side. That's more like the mitigation response kind of thing. And the flip side is, as I raised earlier, is that some elements of it actually are conducive to reducing pressure on the climate, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. So while we're looking at how these potential innovations will be helping with the climate change, I would definitely like for us to talk about the opportunity for growth in our economy, because right now there's a change and the way people earn. I was talking about how we don't go to the bank. We can do financial transactions from just using our phones. I mean, the Internet of Things have made life very easy for everyone, and how all of this has come to add to our revenue. The GDP of the nation is going to be greatly impacted. So how do we leverage more on the opportunity of the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, as I was saying, the first thing to do is to make sure everybody's online. In other words, that you've got the broadband, you're making use of your spectrum, you're building information systems step by step. What that means is like a population registry, health systems, policing systems, etc. That you're building up human capital. You're building up people capability to manage these systems, respond to them, to be taking up the jobs of the future, that you're bringing together blended finance from public and private sources to be financing all of this. All of these are essentials. And then, starting to attract business. So, like, for example, business process outsourcing types of jobs, getting people to access what's called, what I understand is like O-desking. It means that you've got people in communities who are doing everything from CVs to design online and getting opportunities globally. Is a thing that a lot of Pakistanis do it, Indians, like all over the world, where you can just access these people anywhere who can do work for you. These are fantastic opportunities. And then, of course, creating digital money. I was just referring to Flutterwave as an example, but that's a set of opportunities that have been emerging around the continent, around mobile money. So there's a lot that can be enabled that would solve real African problems.
I mean, while we're solving these particular problems, there are other problems that I said that I must say, or I should admit, has been in the news lately. There's cybercrime, and of course, more torchlight has been on this part of the world, Nigeria. How do we limit the risk, and of course, all of this coming out of the emerging tech, taking advantage of this technology to limit the risk of cybercrime, so we can have greater prosperity and peace in the world?
Huge question everywhere. I mean, very, very dangerous. Most, governments have a very poor grip on it. Most governments around the world, and companies, of course, are scrambling to figure out what to do. And major companies are getting around the world are being penetrated sometimes by just some random kid. So it's a huge, huge issue. The issue also of personal protection, I guess we're playing catch up now, but it's a huge question. I wish I had more answers, but it is certainly something that governments, including African governments, should be very worried about, and people should be very careful.
Of course. We'll definitely be looking for more ways and solutions to reduce cyber crime and cyber attacks. Is the reason why I asked the question, because this has greatly affected so many lives, talking about how their privacy is being interrupted, and of course how informations are being leaked without permission from the owners and all of that great stuff. But we look forward to having a great Africa Tech Festival this year. One thing that I want you, before you go, maybe give us something like we can look forward to in this year's event.
Well, I can only really speak to, I guess, what I'm involved in.
Okay.
So on the Monday, I think it's the 7th of November, I'll be moderating a session on climate change and 4IR in a leaders summit. Mm-hmm. On Tuesday, November 8th, I'm giving a keynote, and there, what I was going to say earlier is that I'm not on the Planning Commission, but what I am doing for the presidency is that I'm leading the development of the National Infrastructure Plan in South Africa, and I'll be speaking to the connection between, broadband infrastructure, growth, and how we drive digital capability in Africa. And I'll be speaking to many of the things I just raised now, but obviously in more depth. On another day, and I just don't have it in my mind, but I think it's the Thursday, I will be moderating a session on what's called co-opetition, which is a funny thing in co-opetition and rollout of broadband in Africa. And it's a funny thing in this industry because in telecommunications, I used to be chief of strategy at Telkom, which is a big telecommunications company in South Africa. And the interesting thing about this industry is you could be in court with one company, and with the same company, you're doing a big deal around like a multi-billion-dollar deal, and you're also in court with them on a separate issue. And it's a funny thing that your biggest competitors are also companies that you're cooperating with and that you're fighting with, and it's very, very funny. So, that's generally the theme that we're going to be covering. What I think also is really interesting is that on the Tuesday night, I'll also be there on August 8th, not August, of course, it's November. To buy more time this year. But so November 8th, there's going to be an event. I think it's around 5 p.m. and it's going to focus on women in tech. Oh. And I'm just going to be going there. But, as a woman who's had been on the executive of a telecommunications company, I can tell you it's not easy. And there aren't many women around, whether in consulting or in executive management anywhere in the world, not just in Africa. But you look at the boards and the executive management of any of the major telecommunications companies, ICT companies, and you will find very few women. It is not a friendly environment, I can tell you. And so I'm very passionate. We had a women's leadership program when I was at Telkom. It's a huge issue of building women into strategic positions in the industry. I think it's extremely male dominated.
I would like to ask one very important question, because over here we also struggle with this same thing, having very few women in tech, and of course their confidence level is not as great as that of men, so they usually move away from some positions. So what would your advice be for women in tech that are looking at some high positions but are not confident enough to go into those territory?
Well, the first thing is you have to show the confidence. You got to stand up for yourself. And part of the problem, I do a lot of mentoring, and part of the thing is that women don't get mentored and men do. And so, firstly, women who are in leadership positions and men should be actively supporting women to be building that, because you have to realize how important that, whether it's formal or informal, that mentoring is so important, because people can learn the tricks of the trade of how to cope in these environments. And then you've got to stand up for yourself, and I don't mean aggressively. You've got to be as wily as the guys are.
I mean, it has to be the audacity sometimes to just go and prove yourself. If you can do something, you should just go over and show that you're capable of achieving good results as the men. That's what I usually say to ladies I've been able to speak with. Thank you so much for your time and being on the show with me. It's been a very lovely and very great conversation. I look forward to more great stuff from the Africa Tech Festival this year, and I'll be looking forward to your session, especially for the women in tech. I'll definitely keep my ears out for this particular conversation. Thank you very much for your time. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
That's it, guys. A lot for us to look into when we look at the fourth industrial revolution. I feel like if I leave this conversation to continue, we will definitely not put an end to it, because there are so many areas we could talk about, looking at the Internet of Things, looking at broadband, looking at metaverse, looking at the robotics. There's a whole lot of emerging technologies around us, and of course, Africa is looking to be one of the strong competitor when we look at the whole world, and this is just the way to go. So you can always believe us to bring you the best of information when it comes to what is happening in the tech industry.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to catch up on all the live shows right here on africatechradio.com.